What's that?
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Okay, definitely.
I'm going to give you a little background on myself. First, some of you have already, some of you, and then I'm going to talk about what we call New City 101. Okay? So this is kind of a briefing for you as you begin to think about planting a church and move in that direction. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee. My father and mother broke up when I was about 4 years old. My father put my mom and us kids on the train to New Jersey and wound up staying with our grandparents. My mom's life fell apart morally, spiritually, emotionally, economically. She wound up getting pregnant with a guy she was not married to. That lost her job. We wound up going on welfare, living in the city housing projects of Newark, New Jersey. Now, some of you may not be familiar with Newark, New Jersey, but when I lived there, it was called the worst city in America. And it had more housing projects per capita than any other city in the country. And that was because the mayor and the city council were corrupt. And there was, if you've seen The Sopranos, you know a little bit about Newark, New Jersey. Okay, if you've seen American Gangster with Denzel Washington, you know a little bit about Newark, New Jersey. That's the background I come from. And so in that housing project, another single-parent mom reached out to my mom, invited her to a little house church. She heard the gospel. The next day, the evangelist and the pastor of that church came to visit my family in the projects and led our family to Christ. And so that began a lifetime of discipleship, of ministry to my family. And I grew up in that church, and it was a very evangelistic church. They really reached out to a lot of people. Newark was going through this great racial transition. When I first arrived from Tennessee, I would say it was a majority white city. By the mid-'60s, it was a majority non-white city. And this happened to Washington, D.C., it happened to Gary, Indiana, it happened to Newark and Detroit. And so all of a sudden, all of these cities were transformed. There was a lot of hostility, a lot of poverty. And so in 1967, Newark erupted into a riot. And a lot of people were killed, a lot of the city was burned to the ground. If you've seen the movie Detroit, anybody here seen Detroit yet? Okay. Well, that happened the same summer as the Newark riot. And for very similar reasons. A lot of it had to do with perceived police brutality. And that was an issue back in the 60s. It's an issue today. And that kind of friction continues. But in the midst of that, this church I was in, it's called Calvary Gospel Church. When I was in high school, we had about 150 teenagers every Friday night in our youth group. And in that, it was 90% African American. And then there was a smaller group of us who were trained by our pastor to really do a lot of outreach and evangelism. On Sunday afternoons, we would have a practice to sing so we could be a gospel team. And then we would have tea so we would learn how to act when we went out in public. And he really tried hard to get a lot of us ready to go to college. And so we had people come and train us how to take the SAT and how to study and really help to get us out of high school. So God was at work in my family, and I went out to, he introduced me to a millionaire, and he told me he'd pay my way to college anywhere I wanted to go. So I got out of a catalog of Christian schools, and I immediately went to California because it was as far from Newark as I could get. So I went to Biola in Los Angeles my freshman year, but my girlfriend, who was a year ahead of me, she had gone down to Covenant College. She was the first African American female to go to Covenant College. And so some people say I transferred to Covenant because of her. I say it was the Holy Ghost working through her.
Amen. Right.
And so I came to Covenant, and there was this little inner city Sunday school that had been begun in her freshman year. And so she recruited me to get involved. And when I was a junior, I began preaching in that little Sunday school. And so I preached for 2 years, and then we left to go to Covenant Seminary in St. Louis. And we're heavily involved in the inner city up there in a very, very impoverished town called Wellston. And then the folks from Chattanooga came and got me in my senior year and said, we want you to come back and organize us as a church and plant the church. So in 1976, I came back, was ordained, and became the pastor of New City Fellowship, and pastored it for 36 years. And in that time, several other folks who had been on my staff, associate pastors and others, people began to study kind of what we did, and they wanted to start New City Fellowship in other places. So one got started in St. Louis, and one got started in Virginia, Fredericksburg, and one got started in Baltimore. It's called New Song Fellowship. And so they just began to spread out. Now, we are in 70 cities, and it's now called the New City Network. So in 2010, we sort of made a formal decision to create a network. And 5 years ago, when I stepped down as the senior pastor, I became the coordinator of the New City Network. So I work officially for the PCA under Mission to North America. Now, you can let this go right through your head, out the other, doesn't matter. But we have agencies in our denomination. M&A is the agency to help us start churches in North America. We have Mission to the World. Their job is to start ministries in different countries. Mission to North America is focused here. They're the people I work for. I'm a missionary. Oh my goodness, I broke the job. And, but I'm not paying for it, I'm going to tell you that right. And so, my wife and I are missionaries with them, and we have a staff now. I have an assistant named Robert Blevins. He lives in New York City. My wife and I, and Sarah Drexler, who is my administrator. So there's 4 of us on the team. So that means that we travel a lot to visit folks like you. And we're really excited to see what God is beginning to do with you. And I want to just, so that's my background. Any questions about that before I get into this? I have 4 kids. We're working on number 11 grandchild. And my daughter, or my only daughter, the only unmarried one, got married last Saturday. It's a big day.
Oh, wow.
Hallelujah.
Yes.
Now somebody else can pay her bills.
What is your wife the girl that you followed in covenant?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I met her when she came out to our youth group. I was 15. I knew the moment I saw her I would marry her.
Really?
Yeah, it was a very strange, non-Presbyterian kind of thing.
Predestination. It was predestination.
Been married 46 years.
Wow.
And she's definitely blessed of the Lord to put up with me. But we grew up in the same block, same grammar school, same high school, same housing project. So we have a lot of things in common, but she's black and I'm white, and I'm not becoming black and she's not becoming white. And it's very interesting how distinct we are, you know. If you're married cross-gender-wise, which you should be if you're married, you realize, you know, that book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. Well, men and women are different. And we're different ethnically, you know. And even though we're married now, you know, so many things we think alike, you know, there's still things that, oh, I never thought of that, you know. Or I didn't know you would take it that way. That's not what I meant. That never happens to anybody else. Okay. I heard what you said, but I saw your eyebrow, and I know what that means. You know? All right. Well, any other questions about our background? Great. Well, that's the Lord's mercy to me. We've learned a few things about building this kind of church. And we said, well, what kind of church is that? We say that New City churches have 5 things in common. They're urban, they're cross-cultural, they include the poor, have joyful worship, sound biblical teaching. Those 5 things. So in those 5 things, a lot of our churches are very different from each other. But hopefully holding those things in common. And I will tell you that 95% of American evangelical churches are not cross-cultural. The vast majority of Christian churches in America are made of only one ethnicity, one race. Some of them are, made up of specific languages. So you might have a Spanish-speaking church, a Korean-speaking church, a Chinese-speaking church. And of course, it's very difficult if you want to go to church there, if you don't speak that language, to be able to worship. So language can be tough. But black folks and white folks speak the same language. We think, And, but the reality is, this is the hardest group to put together. Why? Well, it's because we have a history. There's a history of racism, a history of slavery, a history of segregation. And because of that racism, African Americans were forced to develop their own churches. This was not their choice. In the days of slavery, at first, it was even against the law to teach Africans how to read. Slave masters did not want that to happen because as soon as black folks started to read, it gave them an aspiration for freedom. And it gave them the sense that they could be equal. And so there were plantation owners who prohibited that. But at the same time, in God's mercy, sometimes slaves would gather what they call brush arbor churches. They would gather out in the woods. Some of them felt called to preach. They would hear the Bible stories. They learned to tell them. Africans were very good at oral tradition. Oral tradition is when you can't read, but you memorize stories that you hear from your ancestors, from your parents, your grandparents. And usually, those were very accurate because everybody in the group would correct you if you told the story wrong. And so oral tradition is very powerful. And so it really kind of hit the fan in Philadelphia at a Methodist church when some of the black folks in that church wanted to come down to the main floor to pray. That's where prayer was held at the altar. And they were grabbed and put out of the church, and so they went and formed the African Methodist Episcopal Church then in the late 1700s. And the mother church was called Bethel. And then came the AME Zion Church and other churches like that. At first they wanted to worship in the normal church, but they were prohibited. So they were put into their own cultural setting. Now what that created was one of the most powerful worship forms that the world has ever seen. And what I mean by that is it's pretty common in America, if you talk about the black church. Now not all black people are the same, okay? There are black denominations, and they can be very different. All right? If you're a black Methodist, you might worship very differently, say from a Church of God in Christ, or from a National Baptist. Okay? Different worship styles, but yet there's a commonality. And I found out I was an Army chaplain, and one time I was asked if I would preach in the Gospel Chapel. And if you're in the military, you might know that the Gospel Chapel is the most popular church service on a military post. And so, in fact, it was so popular, they couldn't hold it in the chapel, they had to hold it in the post theater. And so this was at Fort Dix, and these are basic trainees, and these are kids who just joined the Army, they've been in a few weeks. So I come, they said, would you preach? I said, I'd love to preach at the Gospel Chapel. And so the chaplain gets up and he says, does anybody here know how to play instruments to play in the gospel band? Kids just stood up, walked forward. grab electric guitar, bass, somebody got on the drums, somebody got on the keyboards. He said, we need a choir, 40, 50 kids. This is like 600 people, right? 40, 50 kids come forward. They all know the same music. They could all play, I mean, boom! You have an instant gospel choir from kids from all over the country who have never met each other before. Why is that? It's a result of what racism did to create the black church. And that black church was very instrumental in the cause of civil rights, in the cause of giving black folks a place of identity. There are many, many wonderful things about it. And so, why in the world would we try now to have church together when there's been all this history? And and I want you to know, you're going to have to struggle with some of these questions. I'm not going to answer all these things today. It's going to be a struggle. And every time somebody new joins the church, they're going to be asking a lot of these same questions. Why should I join this church? So just in the issue of being cross-cultural, there's some things we got to think about. Okay? Now, by the way, you notice that I did not use the term multicultural. And I did not use the term multi-ethnic. You can be a multi-ethnic church and be monocultural. Now, I hope I'm not going too fast. If I am, you just tell me, what do you mean by that, okay? Monocultural means one culture. So you could put black folks and white folks together in one church and it'd be a white church. All right? The preaching's white, the music's white, everything about the way they do church is white. One of our greatest churches in the PCA is a church called Redeemer in New York City. They have a great preacher there. He's just stepped down. His name is Tim Keller. Tim Keller, and now it grew to about 5,000 people. 50% Asian. Many Koreans, many Chinese in this church. So if you walk in, some of the pastors are Korean or Chinese. The church is very mixed, but it is monocultural. There's really no Asian culture in the worship. You know, everybody there pretty much, they're all the professional class. People are assimilating into American culture. It's basically, you feel, as a white person and you like white worship, you feel very comfortable there. That's a multi-ethnic church. Monoculture. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to do something that's almost impossible. We're trying to do something that is cross-cultural. That is, we know that everybody who comes to a church like New City gives up something of their background to be there. The danger is when you come to a church like this and you want it to be what you're used to. When you want to say, I'm not giving up anything. Y'all need to change for me. That's when there's going to be conflict. So, white people give up things, black people give up things, Asian people give up things, Latinos give up things to be part of a cross-cultural church. What is the operating basis of that? You ever heard of these things before? Sort of the personality of Jesus. Okay? You come into a church like this, basically you come as a servant. And you say, God wants me to love other people. And in fact, this is the cross-cultural strategy of the New Testament, which is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, beginning at verse 19. So if you ever want to know how can you be cross-cultural, you need to study that passage of Scripture. What does it say? Paul says, though I am free from all men I make myself a servant to all, in order that I might by all means win some. To the Jew, I became like a Jew, in order to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, to win those under the law. To those without the law, I became like one without the law, though I myself am under the law of Christ, to win those without the law. To the weak, I became like one who is weak, in order to win the weak. I have become all things to all men, in order that I might by all means win some. And so, the real secret is what we call becoming. Becoming something other than you've been, culturally. Now you might say, Paul was confused. He should have just said, I'm a Jew, I love being a Jew, I'm staying a Jew. If that had happened, we who are Gentiles might never have heard the gospel. Because everybody here who's not born Jewish, we're all Gentiles, even though we're divided up ethnically. We would never have been included, except Paul said, even though I'm very Jewish, no one was more Jewish than Paul. All right? He was a Pharisee. I mean, he was zealous for the Old Testament religion. Jesus saved him. And one of the great jokes of the Bible is that God made him a missionary to the Gentiles. People he hated. He hated the whole idea of Christianity. He hated the idea that Jesus a Jewish man could be God. He couldn't accept that. And he couldn't accept the idea that Gentiles would be included. Boy, God radically changed him. And so, for the rest of his life, he was always adapting. He would go from one country to another, one city to another in the Roman Empire. He's learning that language. He's listening to the culture. He's studying how the people think. He's eating their food. He's exposing himself to danger. You know, he goes through a whole list. You know, in Corinthians, he said, I'm in danger from my countrymen, and I'm in danger from those who aren't my countrymen. I'm in danger in the city, and I'm in danger in the country. You know, I mean, just everywhere he went, he exposes himself to danger. And the reality is, you put yourself in a cross-cultural church, it can really feel uncomfortable. Not only that, but your own family members and friends will question you. You know, and that happens on both sides. You have white folks, they're going to lose friends as soon as they associate with black people. And you will have black folks, your relatives and friends will say, what are you doing in that white church? And they'll act like you're a traitor. And emotionally, this is really tough for people. So one of the things I want to encourage you about is please understand, do not think of yourself as a hero. Everybody in the church is a hero. All right? Everybody in the church is going through that kind of a struggle. So stop thinking, oh, you know, I'm the one coming to these people to really help them. You know, we all have that kind of thing. And the more racist the environment is, the harder. Now, I would just tell you, frankly, 50 years ago, we couldn't do this. 50 years ago, people would have their house burned down and crosses burned on their property or whatever. So in many ways, praise the Lord, a lot of progress has been made. Amen?
Amen.
But that doesn't mean it's easy. Okay. All right. Now there's something else besides ethnicity in New City Church. Remember you said the thing, include the poor? You know, the poor have their own culture. And economics is tough for people to be able to relate to each other. And for some of you, that will be a harder barrier to cross than the ethnic one. If everybody here has an education and has a job, we can pretty much get along. But boy, if you grew up hustling, and you know, You live in a survival mentality, all the middle class people are going to have a hard time with you. You're going to have a hard time with them. So, any questions about that aspect? Seriously? Okay, well let's talk about. Let's unearth this a little bit more. What are some aspects of where being cross-cultural kicks in? All right, and I would just say the very first part is what we call relationships. That includes friendships. You have to ask yourself, how deep are those? We are not a cross-cultural church if we just sit in the same pew together in church. All right? You can come in. Now, by the way, this happens in white churches and black churches too. You come in on any given Sunday, just because you're sitting in the same pew doesn't make you friends with the people in that pew. And you can go to church with them for 20 years. And they don't know anything about you. So the question is, how deep are the friendships? Are you in each other's homes? Do you take care of each other's children? Are you there for each other when you're sick or in the hospital? My wife and my daughter, they kind of have this little test to see how cross-cultural people are. They have two tests they use. Let me look at their Facebook friends. Okay? Let me see how interracial the friends are on Facebook. Because if they're all just one ethnicity, then maybe they're just talking a game and they really don't have friends. And if they get married, who's in the wedding party? Wow. And that's going to be an interesting thing as your church grows, and somebody grows up in the church and they're white. Everybody in the whole wedding party is white. They don't have any black friends who stand up there with them. That tells you something. I wish you'd have seen my daughter's wedding last week. It was amazing. It was a great time. Relationships, friendships, worship. Now, by the way, the church that you're starting is in what denomination? Okay, what kind of Presbyterian?
Evangelical.
All right, what's the name of the denomination?
Presbyterian Church in America.
Okay, PCA. This is a very conservative denomination. I mean, these people cross their T's and dot their I's about everything. Okay? These are the straight-laced people. And this morning I preached the Trinity, so I started the sermon. I said, I had to teach them how to say amen. So that they would talk back to me when I was preaching. And I told them, and this is true, I said, how do I know as a preacher if Presbyterians are really like what I'm saying? When I'm preaching, they frown at me. They lean forward. And if I say something they really like, they grunt. But if you're not used to that, and you came to a white Presbyterian church and you were preaching to them, you said, these people are mad. They're angry at me. You go to a black church, most typically, especially if it's Baptist or it's Pentecostal, man, you feel like you're floating when you preach. Because people are talking to you, they're having a conversation with you. I preached, one Sunday I preached at Mount Parent Baptist Church in Chattanooga, and my wife Joan was with me. And I came out, and I was feeling pretty good about the sermon. And I said, you hear all the amens? She said, yeah. She said, but when they amen the announcements, what does that tell you? So, worship can be very different. have in a Presbyterian church a rule about worship. It's called the regulative principle. Basically, it's built from the Ten Commandments, from where it says, you don't make a graven image, you don't worship any other god. So in other words, when we come to worship, we don't invent stuff. We don't make stuff up to make church better. We basically say, what does the Bible say about how we ought to worship? That's what we do. We do what the Bible says. Amen.
Amen.
The problem is, a lot of folks don't realize that a lot of what they think is Bible is culture. Okay? Most Presbyterian churches do not worship the way Hebrews worshiped in the book of Psalms. So if the book of Psalms says, clap your hands, all you people, shout unto God with the voice of triumph. There are certain churches that if you ever shouted in church, they'd be walking you out. I've heard pastors, something happens and people start clapping, and pastors, no, don't clap! No one clap! We only do that if if you go to Broadway, you clap in the theater, but you don't clap in church. And you go, but the Bible says clap.
Amen.
So in other words, what has happened is, culturally, especially among Presbyterians, is very non-emotional worship. They're afraid, and I'll tell you frankly, they are afraid of emotion. Because they think when you're emotional, you're out of control. That's not true. What does God want you to worship with? What part of you does God want? Everything you got. Your mind, your body, your emotions. He wants it all. And what has happened for us is, and I'll say this to our shame, and this is very European, very Northern European. We are very cognitive, very intellectual. We are really focused on our theology. You got to be right. Ain't no guessing here. This is right and this is wrong. And so anytime you bring up emotion, it scares us. The black church, on the other hand, has a lot of what you might call art in it. There is a freedom of emotion and expression that happens in the church. And there's some of the most beautiful preaching you have ever heard comes out of the black church. Now, both groups lack what the other could give.
Amen.
And some of the greatest preaching in the world is when you combine both of them. You got great theology, and you got emotion. You got great science, and you got great art. And that's what we hope will happen in cross-cultural churches. So the worship is what you might call a hybrid. You blend. Our church in Chattanooga, we write a lot of our own music. And if you ever want to go, you can go to ncfmusic.org and get a lot of music information. James Ward, our director, he's a very white guy, but he is a cross-cultural musician, has a master's in jazz, and some of the music is fantastic. It'll just float you in the air. And so, any questions about that?
I don't understand. I grew up Baptist, and then when I found the PCA, Reformed Presbyterianism, just felt the freedom of it. Because growing up in a Baptist church, it could be very subtly legalistic. So I don't understand. I mean, now we were pretty straight-laced then too, but that's the part I don't understand. That Reformed Presbyterians get the freedom that we have in Christ.
Here.
Yeah.
We get it intellectually.
Yeah.
We don't know how to do it culturally. All right? And so legalism can come in a lot of different ways. Legalism can be fundamentalism, where if you smoke, you drink, you chew tobacco, you go
Dance
to movies,
and
you dance, play cards.
Yeah.
That means you're not a Christian. You can't be a Christian and do those things. Well, Presbyterians said, no, that's baloney. If it's not in the Bible, don't be making rules about it. We're not saved by that. We're saved by grace through faith. That's freedom. Hallelujah. But at the same time, we make up our own rules about other things. And sometimes they're kind of unwritten rules. You just know it as soon as you walk in the building. This is the way you do things. And if you don't, so basically what I'm telling you is you guys as a church will have to develop an apologetic. You will have to develop a defense. This is why we worship the way we do. And most of the time when you go to church, nobody's going to bother you about this. But when you sometimes go to Presbytery or General Assembly, and these, we'll worship in a certain way, you'll hear people judge us about, moving. My wife says, this is one of her quotes, she doesn't understand how white people can sing and not move. Because, and our choir is funny because you got black folk and white folk in it, and the black folk are swaying all in the same direction, and the white people are bouncing. Okay? There's something different about us. Now here's the cool thing: white people can be trained. They're smart enough; they can watch and
just lock on.
Every once in a while, I see a black person grab. I'm with you. And you gotta learn to enjoy that. To enjoy the freedom of that. But for some, how many of us were raised in a church where you don't move and you don't talk in church, and you could get hit, if you did. And so a lot of this is simply what we learn. And there's going to be a lot of relearning in this kind of context. And now I will tell you, there's more to learn than just physical movement. Here's one of the realities of being in a cross-cultural church. You are condemned for the rest of your life, if you're in this church, to answer the same questions to new people over and over again. All right? And the burden will especially fall on the African Americans in the church. Because you're going to be asked the same question you got asked 20 years ago. What should I call you? Should I call you colored, Negro, black, African American? Why should I, and tell me why I should be doing it, and all of a sudden it's like I have to be the answer guy. Or like when Obama was elected, my wife had even white PCA pastors coming up to her saying, "Why do all black people have to vote for Obama?" My wife's got to defend every black person in America, and give an explanation for it. It really ticked her off. None of us can speak for all the rest of us. I don't speak for all white people. I certainly can't speak for all black people. Nobody can, but you can say, well, and that's at that point you say, okay, I got to remember, this is part of discipleship. This is part of training new people. And one of the things you'll do is you will develop some classes, like new members classes, leadership training classes, in which you will talk about culture. You will give them New City 101. And you will say, you need to come get this training so you don't have to keep asking the same questions. Like we celebrate at New City, we celebrate Black History Month in February. It's a big deal for us. And it's a great month. We have visiting pastors, visiting choirs. We sometimes write plays. It's just a fabulous month, and it's gospel focused. It's not just about black people. It's about especially black people who love Jesus and what they went through and how they lived out their lives. And it's a very powerful thing. And people say, why do we do that? White person been in church a couple of years and they get bothered. Why are we celebrating? That's not church. Say, wait a minute. Of all the things that we teach, of all the people that you quote in a given year in a Presbyterian church, how many times do you ever talk about a black person? Isn't it always about some white theologian, some white missionary. In other words, it's just like the school system. We hear about white history all the time. You know, so we set aside a month because we know it's been something that's not been paid attention to. And actually it's a very exciting, good month for us, but there's always somebody who gets upset about it. And it's re-education, training, teaching for them. You got to be patient. You got to go through it. Then every once in a while you'll hit this snag. You ever heard of interracial marriage? And you know, people have accused, they say, we don't go to that church because they teach interracial marriage. Now, I do not teach interracial marriage. I just live it. And by and large, we know people are still always going to marry primarily within their own race. That's just the way it is. The question is, this is no longer the huge evil that, you know, everyone was terrified of integration because they said, this is what it'll lead to. And if you go to church together, this is what it'll lead to. And our point is, what does the Bible say? Who are we not allowed to marry as Christians? Unbelievers. Now that doesn't mean that interracial marriage is therefore easy. There's still a lot of struggle against it. There's still a danger. There's still all kinds of problems that could come up with it. But there's no biblical reason against it if both of them are believers. And here's the reality. This is in our confession. This is why I'm a Presbyterian. Here's a great phrase. Our only rule of faith and practice is the Word of God. Amen. Bottom line. That's why I'm a Presbyterian.
Amen.
The only rule for what I am to believe and how I'm to live comes from one place, the Word of God. If it's not in the Bible, get off my back. If it's in the Bible, you have every right to come and speak to me. So if you catch me stealing, I say, who are you to judge me? No, the Bible says, thou shalt not steal. There it is. Yes, sir. So, any questions about it? So that can still be a tough one for people. And you will find people come into your church and are here for a little while. And then they realize there are different points at which we've found families will sometimes leave our church. One is when they begin to have children. And you have children in the Sunday school. And middle-class white families all of a sudden will say, we got to pull our kids out because we don't like the mix. Or when they're teenagers and romantic relationships might pop up, people will pull out. We've had middle-class black folk want to pull out because they were coming to Sunday school with poor black folk. That happens too. So that economic prejudice will kick in. Okay? Could everybody stand up for a second? I'm probably going way too long. Shake somebody's hand. Do something physical. All right, that's enough.
I gotta stop it.
Okay, now the next thing I want to talk about,
Sing out the 10.
I use the phrase in the 5 things, include the poor. Thanks for being here. One of the verses I read this morning in my sermon was where James and Peter and John told Paul, they said, the only thing they said to me was that I should remember the poor. The same thing I was eager to do. Now that is a very Jewish and Jesus way of thinking. Because you got to remember that if you study the family of Jesus, you know, in the New Testament, there were 3 people who wrote that give you an idea of how Jesus felt about the poor. Do you know who they were? His mother Mary, in the book of Luke, in what is called the Magnificat, you get a view of what she thought about the poor. His brother James, who wrote the book of James.
Oh.
That was the actual physical brother of Jesus. They didn't have the same father. They had the same mother. And the teachings of Jesus himself. When you compare those 3 people in their view of poverty and wealth, you realize the discussions in Mary's kitchen were pretty radical, pretty intense. Because Mary says, you know, you filled the hungry with good things, but you sent the rich empty away. You know, she had this view of how God had turned the tables and lifted up. And that comes right from Hannah's prayer in the book of Samuel. And so this is a very Jewish, very Jesus idea. You can't read what Jesus taught about the poor and not see how radical he was about it. Read Matthew 25. He said, when you didn't help, you didn't feed this hungry person, you didn't feed me. When you didn't put clothes on this naked person, you didn't clothe me. When you didn't visit this person in prison or who was sick, you did not come to visit me. And they'll say, Lord, when did we see you hungry and not feed you, and naked and not clothe you, and sick and in prison? He said, in that you did not do it to the least of these, you didn't do it to me.
That's right.
That's how much Jesus identifies with the poor. And then James gets all radical. Okay? So, mercy is very much a part of who we are as Christians. It's always been true of the church. And that was our great reputation. And it's what turned the Roman Empire upside down. Even one of the Roman emperors said, these Christians are helping the poor, our poor, and they're making us look bad. You know, because the Romans, especially if they had a baby girl, that you know, in those days, boys were favored over girls. And so they would actually try to kill their daughters. They would take the daughter out and leave her out on the mountaintop or whatever, so she would be exposed and die, because they didn't want daughters. They wanted sons. Well, Christians come by, pick up these babies and take them and raise them. You know, the Christians were the ones, when everybody was running away from the lepers, Christians were taking care of them. This was who we were as the Church of Jesus Christ. Now, one of the problems with American Christianity is we became successful. I mean, the reality is most people who are Christians have a view that they should work hard, they should save their money, they should work honestly. And you know what happens when you sort of have that kind of a work ethic and a lifestyle? Yeah, you think it's you, but you actually get wealthy. You know, you say, you know, Christians are saying, you know, we need to have an education. And when you give your word, you ought to keep it. And when you work for somebody, you ought to give them all you got. Well, what happens when you do that? Usually, unless there's injustice, you usually prosper. Well, American Christians have prospered. So we actually go to churches where I've heard people tell me this, we don't have any poor people in our church. I go, no, seriously, we don't have any poor people in our church. Everybody here, middle class, they all have jobs, they all own their homes. some of them own more than one home. So when you tell us help the poor, who you want us to help? That's right. I say, send me the money. I'll figure it out for you.
Let me get a loan.
Now, one of the problems is our churches have moved away from the neighborhoods of the poor. And you see this again and again. You have a church, they're doing well, they're winning people to Christ. All of a sudden you realize everybody's commuting from out of town. The pastor says, we got to get out of this neighborhood. They'll sell that church or they abandon it and they go out to the suburbs. They build a nice big church. This is happening to black churches as well as white churches. And they are leaving the neighborhoods behind. All right? During the days of segregation, if you lived in a black community, your school teacher, your school principal, church pastor, the owner of the funeral home, the owner of the barber shop, they all lived in that same neighborhood with you. You were surrounded by hard-working middle-class people. But what happened when we had integration was finally black folks who made money could buy homes in other places, and they began to get away from those neighborhoods. This has happened all across America. White people, black people, any kind of ethnic group, they want to move away from the communities of the poor. Now, here's something that we say in our network. That we believe that the best thing you can do for poor people is to plant the right kind of church in their community. The one thing poor people need most is a good church right in their community. When I say the right kind of church, I mean a church that loves that neighborhood, that knows how to help people, that wants to raise those people up as leaders. It's not a church that just drives by and throws groceries out the window. What we call drive-by mercy. It's not mercy tourism where we get a bus and say, let's go down to the slums and let's get out, paint a house, and get back on the bus real quick. Let's get out of here. We actually want poor people to come to our church. You know why? It's a very personal reason for me. Because that's what happened to me.
Amen.
I can remember my mom crying at the kitchen table because there was no food left. And a knock came at the door, and go to the door, and there were the deacons of the church with bags of groceries. So to me, deacons are heroes. They are people who come and help you. When you got nobody else, the church is there to help you. Now, by the way, most Americans still think that's what a church ought to do. Most people will tell you, if anybody should help you, it should be a church. The reality is, most churches won't. They will send you somewhere else. They'll send you to the Salvation Army. They'll send you to the rescue mission. They'll tell you, we don't do that. My question is, why would you send somebody away who came to you for help? You talk about evangelism, you talk about reaching the lost, and here somebody actually comes to your church door and says, help me, and you say no. How do you square that with the gospel when Jesus said if somebody asks you for something, give it to them? How dare you not show mercy? Now, by the way, I want you to understand that if you do this wrong, you can hurt people. So you got to do it with biblical wisdom. You got to do it in such a way that you don't hurt the poor by making them feel worthless, or making them feel less than you, or making them dependent on you. Amen. You got to help them so they can help themselves. So we've learned a lot about this. By the way, you might want to buy my book, which is all about this. It's called Merciful. It's on sale at Amazon. But basically, I wrote it to try to help churches learn how to help the poor in a way that would really help them. Some of you may have read the book When Helping Hurts. Anybody read that book? That was written by one of the men of my church, Brian Ficker. And his first edition was wrong. And we had to speak to him about that, and he fixed it. Because you
The
could,
one that came out is the right. The one that's actually on the shelves is the right one, right?
yeah, well, the second edition,
Okay, fix whatever one.
yeah, because in the first one, it gave the impression that you shouldn't help poor people at all. And that's not biblical. That's just flat wrong. But his point, but don't help them in a way that will hurt them, is good. And so we're all still learning about this. But hopefully as your church grows, you're going to develop a mercy team. You're going to develop deacons or deaconesses. You're going to have people who are trained and learn how to talk to poor people when they come to you for help, how to go visit them in their homes, how to build a strategy for them to go from point A to point Z so they can be discipled out of poverty. Because I don't think God wants us just to keep people in poverty. I think He wants us to disciple them out of it. It takes a long time sometimes. But it can happen. But it won't happen unless you do it on purpose. Okay? This is something you have to think about. This is what we do on purpose. We're not going to let you stay in the condition we met you. If you're going to follow Christ in this church, we're going to help build a plan for you so you can get a job, you can learn how to work, you can take care of your family, and you can help take care of the rest of us. It's almost what we do with our own children. All right? Our children, they start off, man, I have 4 kids. You know the terrible thing is they lived off me. For years. I had to pay for all their food, their housing, their clothes, everything. Came out of my pocket. And so I thought sometimes, these boys will never learn how to work. They're going to be living off me into my old age. And now all my kids are hard-working kids. All right? And they want to make their own way. How did that happen? Some of it was just looking at the model of their parents and saying, I need to learn more. Some of that was when you said, no more. If you want this, you earn it. I'm not going to give it to you. For some of them, that was a great moment. That was a moment of freedom for them, and me too. Now, one of the things that you need to know is mercy has 2 parts, okay? One part we call charity, or relief, and the other part we call development. You need both when you really work mercy in a community. There are times when any one of us might need relief. All right? Your house burns down, you get people out in Houston right now, getting caught in the flood, lose everything they have. They need somebody coming in from the outside who rescues them. I'm going to give you a place to stay. I'm going to give you food to eat. I'm going to get you in your clothes are ruined. You don't have any. I'm going to take care of you. All right? Now, I guarantee you that in a month or two, some of those very same people in Houston who are getting relief, they won't need it anymore. They will be back at work. They will find another place to live. Insurance will kick in. They'll get stuff back. They will recover. Not all of them, but a good part of them, okay? But if a year from now we're saying, no, we don't want your work. We got a plan for you. We're going to keep giving you food. Stay in the shelter. It's crazy. They won't like it. And then it costs too much money. Yet we have churches doing that to people. We're only going to give you relief. We want, and there are some people in America who will keep taking. They'll just keep taking. Well, what I want to do is get people to the point where they can learn to work, so we have jobs for life. They can get placed in employment. They can maybe get training, send them to junior college, or finish their GED, or get, whatever a skill that I can train them in. Maybe I can open a door for them at a place. Maybe it needs to go beyond just individuals, and we need to work systems. Maybe we need to look at Orangeburg and say, you know what? We don't have any decent housing. How do I help people own their own home? They're living under a slumlord, And do you have any like that in Orangeburg?
Yep.
Okay. And so you know what? It's funny. Today I got a tour of some and I saw some houses that could really use some paint. But I will bet you, if I went to that house and said, "I'd like to paint your house," they said, "Well, I don't own the house. The landlord owns the house." If I go to that landlord and say, I don't say, "I'd like to paint your house," he's making money off that. So I want to tell him, "Why don't you do your job and fix up your house?" He said, "Well, when I'm making enough profit, then I'll do it." Well, I bet you there's some widows living in Orangeburg who own their own homes who can't afford to paint their own home. I could help an entire neighborhood if I selectively painted those houses. And I could probably raise all the money and get all the volunteers to do it. Because we've done it in lots of other cities. Maybe I need to buy some of those homes and refurbish them and still keep the amount it costs low so those people could still own that house. We've done that. So we used to have the Harambe Housing Corporation. We've built new houses. We've gotten houses given to us from the city and county government. They said, "This house is abandoned. If you will fix it up, you can have it as long as you help the poor person own it." Okay, we can do that. This is all in the name of development. Do you have any people from Orangeburg who go to prison? You do? Do any of them ever come back? Yeah. How easy is it for them to get work when they come home?
Hard.
So maybe we should develop a company that employs ex-cons. I knew of one company in Birmingham. They refurbished all the old iced tea and coffee makers from restaurants because they get filled with mineral deposits. So had about 6 men, mostly ex-cons. They would clean those out. They would resell them. That money was used to employ them. In St. Louis, we took teenagers and taught them how to tuck point brick buildings. And so the government said, "Whoa, if you'll tuck point the homes of the elderly and the poor, we have a government plan, we will pay you to tuck point their homes." All of a sudden, we now have a company of young adults who were trained as teenagers in tuck pointing. Now they get contracts from Washington University to tuck point all their buildings. That kind of economic development is possible through the church. You can create a separate 501c3, a nonprofit, or even for-profit businesses to be able to help your own people. And I will tell you, when you start doing that, the whole community wakes up. They realize there's a church in town that cares about them. Now, I don't pretend this is easy. I've started about 6 nonprofits. It's always hard to raise enough money. Sometimes there's management issues. You're trying to find good leaders. Sometimes things don't work out right. But we have started an economic community development corporation. We have started a medical clinic. We have started a sports ministry. We've started a disaster response ministry, a widows ministry. There's a lot that's possible. Okay, I've taken enough of your time tonight. Any questions as we bring it to a close?
Is there a new city in Orlando, Florida?
In Orlando, there's New City Paramore, and there is Christ United Fellowship. 2 of the churches in our network.
But it doesn't
Yeah.
matter because
You have
you're
family in
not moving
Orlando?
away. So it doesn't matter.
We are moving.
Yes.
What tips do you have for us as we try to recruit people into our fellowship?
I couldn't hear the first word.
Tips,
Tips.
yes.
Um,
I could tell you my struggle and then maybe you could give me a tip. So for example, sometimes when I'm inviting people to church and I try to explain some cross-cultural church, I could see persons are not wanting to join such a thing. And most times, I just try to tell them, well, you could just come and see if you like it. But I feel I'm not convincing enough.
You're not the only one.
Oh, you got us here.
Hey, we're all in this room, right?
And they just shy away or just be standing there saying, okay, I guess I'll think there's something more interesting to say next time.
You know, remember, this is a spiritual enterprise. And it's only going to succeed if the Holy Spirit is in it. And you're only going to be effective reaching your neighbors or friends if the Holy Spirit is drawing them. And sometimes you have no idea why people come. You know, from a worldly point of view, you know, they'll say, well, where's your building? You know, some people won't come to a church if it doesn't have a building. You know, we didn't have a building for the first 14 years. We met in a YMCA, we met in a Christian school, and you know, the joke in my family is my mother-in-law would not even tell people I was a pastor until we finally got a building that looked like a church. Wow. Then I was her son-in-law, the pastor. But it was like, you're not a real church until you have a building that looks like a church. And that's just a very worldly, physical thing. The other thing is that a lot of times people, when they come, if they do come, and they see the love and the joy is there, that's a powerful attraction to them. And so you have to pray. But remember, it's spiritual. And do not get down on yourself and say, how come I'm not affected? You know, your job is just to be faithful and to invite, you know, and to love. And every once in a while, you'll get in conversations where people will complain about Christians, or they'll complain about the church, or they'll talk about issues in their life. And that's right when you can say, I go to a church that loves people. I go to a church that tells the truth. I go to a church where we're trying to live holy. You know, and it's interesting how the word will get out. If you help poor people, the word will get out. But there will be people who hate you. Church people who hate you. Because there are people who love their white church and people who love their black church, and they think what you're saying is they're not good enough. They take it as a rebuke to them. And my wife has suffered this from black people she respects, but they will say, oh, only brainwashed black people would go to a church like that. Because, you know, why would you listen to a white pastor? Solidarity is such an important value in the black community because of racism. So basically, you're going to have to live this out to prove it. You got to live it out to say, we are not running away from the black community. Your pastor, part of his job is to make friends with black pastors, so that if anything happens in the black community, he is saying to you as a church, we are with them. Like the prayer meeting that you held last week in public. That was a statement. New City is with you. What happened in Charlottesville was an attack against us all. We will not be silent. And you have to do that intentionally. I joined the Black Ministers Union in my city. I was a member of it for 25 years. I was the only white guy. And many of them did not trust me at first. But over the years, that unity became strong. So you got to live it out. That's not a good tip, I guess.
That's a great question. Good question.
But some of us, we definitely should talk about that.
I guess I thought about the answer to the question of why do I want to become part of New City Fellowship. And something Paul and I have talked about is we were overseas and in an international church. And the pastor was a white American Presbyterian, but we were in a capital city, so there were lots of folks who worked in embassies and stuff. And there was, on Pentecost Sunday, different different countries would be represented by folks from that country. And they would do a song or something, or a poem or whatever from their culture, or from their country. And the one that stands out to both of us the most was a group from Cameroon. And they were singing in Cameroonian, I guess, but I felt like I got a taste of heaven that day. And knowing that this is what heaven looks like. Heaven doesn't look like my mono-ethnic church on Sunday morning. That it's going to be a cross-cultural, in fact, whites may well be a minority in heaven, because statistically speaking, there have been more non-whites on the planet than whites. But why would we not want to do that now? Just to get that little bit of taste of what heaven's going to look like.
Well, that's why you have the name New City.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's named after the New Jerusalem,
Mm-hmm.
the city that comes down out of heaven as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And in that place, people from every tribe, tongue, and nation are wearing white robes gathered around the throne of God. So we are trying to be the model of that new city here on earth. That's why the church is named that. So, and there will be people in the days ahead. May God give you this. Certainly it's happened in Chattanooga. But we have people come in, even non-Christians, who will tell us, I always thought this is what the Christian church should be. I mean, I always thought, and then we'll have people just, the first month they're there, they just weep every Sunday. They said, this is what my heart is yearned for. And a lot of our people who are there, they will never go to another kind of church. They don't understand how you could be satisfied being separated anymore. So, not everybody, but it does make an impact. And may God be glorified to His glory. So, I will see some of you next week in St. Louis, Lord willing. Let me just tell you, to end with, we do certain things to help train people, yes?
Nope, I'll see you next week.
Oh, okay. Sometimes in the church, you hold the finger up means you're going to leave the room. We have conferences every year. Our first one in the year is in St. Louis. It's a theology conference. Reconciliation and Justice Conference. It's held at New City in the end of January every year. Midweek in St. Louis.
Everything's in
Not everything.
Pretty much.
Then we have Urban Ministry Training Institute. And that's in Chattanooga. It begins on Memorial Day every year for 5 days. So on Memorial Day we have a big block party, and then for 4 days we have training, how to do children's Bible clubs, how to do cross-cultural ministry, how to do mercy ministry, economic development. We have some great faculty, but every year that's held at the end of May. Then every other year we have a cross-cultural music and worship conference. In July 2018, it will be held in Atlanta. Okay? And especially if you're a musician, this is a party. Everybody, they swap songs, they learn how to lead choirs, just all kinds of great expertise in this. For our leaders, we have the New City Leaders Summit every other year we take a cruise. And last year, your pastor and his wife were able to come up. So every other year we do that. The year in between, the leaders have a retreat. This year it'll be up at Rich Haven in North Carolina in the end of October, I believe. Okay. We also have LDR, which stands for Leadership Development and Resource, which we started about 7 years ago, especially for African Americans who were in seminary preparing for the ministry, who were reformed. Remember, the PCA is overwhelmingly a white denomination. It's 10% Korean, 1% African American. There are 55 black pastors in the denomination. Okay? They pretty much all know their number. What number they came in. I was number 5. But they're spread out. So when some young men, and we need more, pray for this. Like one of the things we'd love to have, we have campus ministers. We would love to have an African American teaching elder here at South Carolina State. And we have one down in Jackson State, in Jackson, Mississippi. They got 250 African American college students every Thursday night in worship. And there's great potential for leadership development there. So we held this conference on Labor Day. So next week, and it grew. At first, the first year we did it, we had 10. Now I think we'll have 400 people coming to this conference next week. So
We're sending 8.
yeah, which is a problem because the Chapel of Covenant only holds 300 and something. So I don't know what I'm going to do. Then every year we go to the Christian Community Development Association to learn this stuff. And this was started by John Perkins. If you haven't read any of his books, I really encourage you to read him. African American, he's 87 years old, and he preached last Sunday at New City in Chattanooga. Powerful man of God. Went to the 5th grade, has 12 honorary doctorates, and is just a brilliant, godly man who really knows how to organize to help the poor. And he's been one of my main mentors in my life. Pray for them. He went home to Jackson, and 2 days later, his youngest son died. So they just had the funeral yesterday.
And where is that held and when?
This year is held in Detroit in October, but it moves around from city to city. So it's usually in the fall. About 3,000 people come to this. And we always host a PCA dinner or luncheon. So if you come, let us know and you get one free meal. All right.
Thank you.
Pastor.
Thank you.